There are moments in life that don't feel important when they happen. No warning. No music. No sense of finality. Just a decision you make quickly because it feels practical, reasonable, even harmless. I've spent years thinking about one of those moments. Not because it ruined my life immediately, it didn't. But because everything that came after quietly grew out of it, like rot beneath a polished floor. If you asked me when my life changed, I wouldn't say the day I lost everything. I would say the day I chose not to interfere. It was ordinary. Almost insulting in how ordinary it was. I was tired that day. Emotionally tired, the kind that makes you crave silence more than solutions. I remember thinking that I just wanted to get home without complications. Without involvement. That desire alone should have scared me. I saw something happening. Something wrong. Something that needed a voice, a pause, a hand raised to stop it. I understood that instantly. My mind registered the facts, the implications, the possible outcomes. And then another thought arrived, quieter but stronger: this isn't your responsibility. I remember how convincing it sounded. I told myself I didn't have enough information. That stepping in might make things worse. That other people were closer, better equipped, more entitled to act. I told myself I was being rational. So I did nothing. I walked away with the strange relief of someone who believes they've avoided trouble. My heart was still racing, but my body relaxed as distance grew between me and the situation. That relief didn't last. At first, guilt didn't arrive dramatically. It showed up as a mild discomfort, a thought I could dismiss. I replayed the scene once or twice, then told myself it was over. That life moves on. That you can't carry every problem that crosses your path. And for a while, that worked. Days passed. Weeks. Months. On the surface, nothing had changed. My life continued exactly as before. Routines. Conversations. Small plans. Harmless complaints. I was still functional, still present, still accepted. But something subtle shifted inside me. I became cautious in ways I couldn't explain. Quieter. Less decisive. I noticed hesitation where there hadn't been any before. A reluctance to take moral stances, even in trivial conversations. It was as if my inner authority had cracked. I started avoiding situations that required courage, not consciously, but instinctively. I told myself I was choosing peace. In reality, I was avoiding reminders. Because once you ignore your own sense of responsibility, it becomes harder to trust yourself again. The memory returned unexpectedly. Not as an image, but as a feeling, a sudden pressure in my chest when someone talked about accountability. A wave of nausea when I heard phrases like doing the right thing. At night, my mind rewrote the moment endlessly. What if I had said something? What if I had stayed? What if one sentence had changed the outcome? The worst part wasn't imagining disaster. It was imagining that I could have helped. That knowledge settled deep inside me, heavy and permanent. I learned then that guilt doesn't shout. It waits. It waits until your life slows down enough for it to speak. Until distractions fade. Until silence gives it room. And when it does speak, it doesn't accuse you. It asks questions you can never answer. I began to understand something uncomfortable. By walking away once, I had made it easier to walk away again. Not from emergencies but from myself. The first real consequence didn't come as punishment. It came as distance. I noticed it in how I listened to people. I still nodded, still responded at the right moments, but something had shifted. I was no longer fully present when others spoke about fear, responsibility, or regret. Those words felt dangerous, like they might turn inward if I let them linger too long. So I kept conversations shallow. Safe. Polite. I told myself I was just tired. Everyone goes through phases like that. Life is demanding, and not every emotion deserves attention. That's what I believed or pretended to. But guilt has a way of leaking through the smallest cracks. I started having trouble sleeping. Not nightmares, exactly. Just restlessness. I would wake up before dawn with a vague sense of urgency, like I had forgotten something important. Sometimes my heart was already racing when I opened my eyes, as if my body remembered what my mind was trying to suppress. During the day, I became hyper-aware of my own behavior. Every small moral decision felt heavier than it should have. I overanalyzed conversations, replayed interactions, questioned my intentions. Was I being honest or convenient? Was I helping or avoiding involvement? Again, the fear wasn't that I was a bad person. The fear was that I was becoming someone who looked good on the surface and hollow underneath. There was one moment that made it impossible to keep pretending. Someone I cared about was struggling. Not dramatically, not publicly, but clearly. I saw the signs. The hesitation in their voice. The pauses where confidence should have been. The way they asked questions that weren't really questions, but invitations. I recognized it instantly. It was the same moment all over again. Different setting. Different people. Same moral weight. And I felt my body prepare to step back. That reflex terrified me. I realized then that my earlier choice hadn't just stayed in the past. It had trained me. It had taught me that avoidance was survivable. That silence had no immediate consequences. That you could live with unresolved responsibility if you learned to compartmentalize well enough. That was the real damage. Not what happened because I stayed silent. But what staying silent had done to me. I wanted to intervene. I really did. I felt the words forming, pushing upward, demanding space, but they came with fear attached, fear of being wrong, fear of making things worse, fear of taking responsibility for an outcome I couldn't control. Fear disguised as caution. And again, I hesitated. This time, I caught myself. The moment stretched. Seconds felt longer than they should have. I could feel my pulse in my ears. This was the point where the pattern either repeated or broke. I spoke. Not eloquently. Not heroically. I didn't fix anything. I didn't save anyone. I simply acknowledged what I saw and offered presence instead of distance. The relief that followed was immediate and overwhelming. Not because the situation was resolved, it wasn't, but because I hadn't abandoned myself again. That was when I understood the true cost of my earlier choice. It hadn't been a single failure. It had been the beginning of a habit. A habit of stepping away from discomfort. Of outsourcing responsibility to someone else. Of choosing personal safety over moral integrity. The realization didn't absolve me. It didn't undo the past. But it gave shape to something I had been carrying without language. I wasn't being punished by life. I was being confronted by myself. From that point on, the guilt changed texture. It became less accusatory and more instructive. It stopped asking why didn't you and started asking what will you do now? That question was heavier. Because it demanded action in the present, not regret about the past. And action is riskier than remorse. Remorse can be private. Action is visible. I knew then that there would be no clean resolution. No moment where everything balanced out. Some choices remain asymmetrical, one side always heavier. But I also knew something else, something quietly stabilizing. I didn't have to keep paying for one moment forever. But I did have to stop running from it. That realization set the stage for the hardest part, not confession, not redemption, but acceptance. Acceptance that living ethically doesn't mean living without regret. It means refusing to let regret turn you into someone smaller. Acceptance didn't arrive with peace. It arrived with clarity. The kind that strips away excuses and leaves you alone with what remains. I stopped asking myself how to undo the past. That question leads nowhere. It only tightens the knot. Instead, I ask something harder: who am I willing to be now, knowing what I didn't do then? That question followed me everywhere. In conversations, I listened differently. Not with the intention to agree, but to understand. I noticed when my instinct was to retreat, to stay neutral, to protect myself from responsibility. And each time, I paused. Sometimes I still chose silence. But now it was a choice, not a reflex. I learned that integrity isn't about always doing the right thing. It's about refusing to lie to yourself about why you didn't. That honesty is uncomfortable, but it's the only thing that keeps guilt from turning into self-contempt. I stopped trying to justify my past behavior. Justifications are a form of escape. They soften reality until it feels manageable, but they also prevent growth. I let the memory remain what it was, a moment where I failed to act. Not because I was evil. Because I was afraid. Naming that fear didn't make me weaker. It made me precise. I became more present in situations that mattered. Not louder, not dramatic, just present. I learned to speak before certainty arrived, to accept that good intentions don't guarantee good outcomes, and that responsibility doesn't come with control. Sometimes, speaking up made things awkward. Sometimes it complicated relationships. Sometimes it revealed that people preferred my silence to my honesty. That was another loss I had to grieve. But something else began to form quietly beneath the surface, a sense of internal alignment I hadn't felt in years. My actions and my values stopped drifting apart. I trusted myself a little more each time I chose involvement over avoidance. The guilt didn't disappear. It softened. It became part of my internal landscape, not a storm, but a landmark. A reminder of what happens when I disengage from my own moral compass. I stopped seeing it as punishment and started seeing it as memory with purpose. There are nights when the past still visits me. When I replay that moment and feel the familiar tightening in my chest. I let it happen now. I don't push it away. I don't argue with it. I acknowledge it. Because denial is what gave it power in the first place. I understand now that some debts are not meant to be repaid, only carried with awareness. That living well doesn't erase past failures, but it does prevent them from defining every future choice. If you're listening to this and holding on to a moment you wish you could undo, hear this carefully: regret doesn't mean you're broken. It means you noticed. The danger isn't in what you failed to do once. It's in what you allow that failure to teach you. I made one choice. And I paid for it, not with punishment, but with responsibility. I can't change that moment. But I can refuse to let it turn me into someone who keeps walking away. And that, finally, is how I learned to live with it.